Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jacob arrived 15 minutes earlier than agreed. He walked to a table near the window, ordered a simple coffee, and started watching the movement outside. He absent-mindedly fiddled with the silver ring on his finger, something he always did when anxiety began to rise. His face seemed calm, but his eyes told another story. Anyone looking closely would notice marks that time hadn't been able to erase. His gaze seemed to search for something, as if somewhere on that street was hidden a piece of his own life. The minutes felt longer than they really were. He crossed his arms, uncrossed them, ran his hand over his face, took deep breaths, adjusted his watch, checked his phone several times even though he knew there were no messages. This wasn't just any meeting. It was, in fact, the chance to close a chapter that had been unresolved for far too long. As he waited, flashes from the past invaded his mind: laughter, trips, birthdays, promises, and, soon after, the bitter taste of disappointment, pain, and broken trust. He tried to push those memories away, but they came back strongly, as if reminding him exactly of everything that brought him to this moment. When she appeared at the cafe door, he noticed even before looking directly at her. It was as if his body still knew how to recognize her presence, even after all this time. The way she walked, the way she held her bag on her shoulder, her hair tied up the way she always did when she was nervous. Jacob's heart raced, but his face remained expressionless. He pretended to look away but followed every step she took toward the table. When Sophie finally approached, he just gave a slight nod, signaling that she could sit down. Sophie pulled out the chair, adjusted her bag, and sat down with a heavy sigh. For a few seconds, both of them remained in absolute silence. It was as if an invisible wall stood between them, made of everything they had lived through, everything they had lost, everything that had been destroyed. They looked at each other, but at the same time, they seemed like two strangers who had the strange feeling of once having been everything to each other. Jacob held his coffee cup firmly, but he hadn't taken a sip since it arrived. Sophie kept her hands crossed on the table, squeezing her fingers as if fighting for the courage to say what needed to be said. She took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of her bag again, and with a low, almost hesitant voice, thanked him for accepting the meeting. She said she was there because she needed to talk, that she needed to get rid of a weight she'd been carrying for a long time. Her words came out slowly, as if each one was heavy before being spoken. Jacob remained silent, looking directly at her. His face didn't show anger, sadness, or even hope. It was as if he had learned to protect himself from any emotion this woman might provoke. The waiter approached, offering the menu, asking if they wanted anything else. Jacob waved his hand, indicating everything was fine. Sophie asked only for a glass of water. The waiter left, and silence once again dominated the space between them. She then took another deep breath and began to speak. She said she knew this meeting might seem strange, maybe even pointless, but she needed to confront her own ghosts. For a long time, she tried to convince herself that moving forward would be simple, that ignoring the past would suffice, but life made sure to prove otherwise. Her hands trembled, and from time to time, she hid them, trying to disguise it. Jacob, on the other hand, kept his gaze fixed on the window, observing the cars, the people, anything that could help him avoid diving into the memories that were inevitably forming in his mind. Even without looking directly at her, he listened carefully to every word, absorbing everything, as if he knew that from here on, many things could change, or perhaps nothing at all would. And even though neither of them said it, they both knew this meeting carried much more weight than any other moment they'd shared since the day everything fell apart. Sophie held the glass of water with both hands, as if it were the only thing keeping her fingers from trembling even more. For a few seconds, she stared at the liquid swaying inside, trying to find a less painful way to begin, but she realized there wasn't one. Then, she exhaled through her mouth and started talking. She said everything had seemed harmless at first: casual conversations in the hallway, quick jokes between one person and another, work-related messages that gradually extended to random topics. Jacob remained motionless, gazing out the window, but his ears were attentive to every syllable. She said that at first, she thought it was just friendship. Dylan was kind, always willing to listen, making comments that made her feel valued in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Conversations that started in the office began to move outside of it. First, messages on social media, then exchanges of confidences she had never shared with anyone except Jacob. That's when things started spiraling out of control. Sophie squeezed her fingers so hard that her knuckles turned white. She recounted that the first meeting outside of work wasn't planned. Dylan invited her for coffee after a stressful day. She accepted, thinking it would just be that. But on that day, she realized something had changed. She said she felt alive, desired, as if something inside her that had been dimmed had lit up again. And before she realized it, she began wanting these encounters. The conversations became more frequent, more intimate. They started meeting in secret, first in public places, then in increasingly discreet locations. The line was crossed the night they kissed in the parking lot after a company event. She confessed she tried to convince herself it was just a mistake, that it would end with that kiss. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't stop there. Jacob kept his gaze lost outside, but he gripped the coffee cup so tightly that his fingers seemed about to crush it. Sophie discreetly wiped away a tear that rolled down, tucked her hair behind her ear, and continued. She said she never planned to destroy the marriage, never imagined it would turn into a parallel relationship. But she let herself get carried away. And when she realized, she was already living a double life. During the day, she followed her routine with Jacob. Family dinners, laughter, plans, trips, and, in the gaps she found, she ran to Dylan's arms. Deleted messages, invented excuses, unexpected outings, and constant anxiety about being discovered. She paused for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and confessed that at some moments, she believed she could keep this up forever, balancing the two lives. Until everything exploded in the worst possible way. Jacob returned early from a trip and found the two of them together, inside their own home. She lowered her head, squeezing her eyes shut, as if trying to erase that scene from her memory, but she knew it would be impossible. She said she would never forget Jacob's look that day, that she had never felt so much shame, regret, and fear. And from that moment on, everything she knew collapsed. The tears began to flow uncontrollably, and she no longer bothered to hide them. She said that after everything came to light, Jacob left. And with him went everything she knew as life. In the following weeks, she stayed at a friend's house, unable to think clearly. Every item in her suitcase seemed to remind her of what she had lost. Clothes, books, even a simple toothbrush seemed to carry too much weight. She tried to fill that void with anything. She threw herself into work, took courses, tried meeting new people, going out, distracting herself, doing new things. She even got involved with other people, but no connection felt meaningful. Everything seemed forced, mechanical, soulless. The apartment she rented felt more like an empty box than a home. She would wake up, look around, and feel that crushing silence. She tried to distract herself with movies, TV shows, books, but as soon as silence settled in, her mind began torturing her with memories. She remembered the dinners they used to have, lazy Sundays watching random things on TV, the trips, the plans they built together, the dreams that now seemed as distant as they were unattainable. And in this cycle, she came to understand that everything she thought she was seeking outside of the marriage had actually always been there, but she only realized it after losing it. Meanwhile, Jacob took a completely different path. He packed his things and decided to distance himself. He traveled to places he had always wanted to visit, rediscovered pleasures forgotten over the years. He picked up old hobbies, started exercising again, met new people, and allowed himself to live. He made sure to remember who he was before all of this. And as the months went by, he realized that for the first time in a long while, he was at peace with himself. He had a few short relationships, without getting too attached, but each experience served to strengthen his certainty that his happiness would never again depend on someone else. He learned to like himself, to respect himself, to value his own company. He understood that not every void needs to be filled by another person, that sometimes what's missing is simply looking at oneself with more kindness. And when that realization hit, he realized he no longer carried anger, pain, or resentment. He carried only the awareness that some wounds heal but leave scars. Scars that, instead of weakening, end up strengthening those who survive them. Sophie wiped her tears with her fingertips, took a deep breath, and for a few seconds stared at her own hand as if trying to organize the words in her head. The silence between them felt heavier than anything she could say, but even so, she found the strength to continue. Her voice came out lower, shakier, but loaded with something Jacob recognized immediately: regret. A regret that seemed to crush every part of her body. She looked directly into his eyes and said, as clearly as she could, that no matter how absurd it might sound, she never stopped loving him. She explained it took her too long to understand what truly mattered in life. She said that while she was living that illusion with Dylan, she thought she was searching for something new, something different, something to complete what, in her mind, was missing. But after losing everything, she realized that the void she tried to fill from the outside had always been inside her, and that Jacob had never been the problem. She said he had always been her safe harbor, her best friend, her love, and that she was the one who threw it all away without considering the consequences. Her hands trembled so much that she had to cross her arms to try to control herself. She admitted she spent months thinking about how to get a second chance, rehearsing 1,000 times what she would say if he agreed to this meeting. She said she didn't expect him to simply forget everything, that she didn't think it would be easy, but that even so, she had to try. Because if there was even a tiny chance of rebuilding everything, she couldn't let it slip away. She apologized in a way Jacob had never seen before. Each word seemed to hurt her more than it hurt him. She asked forgiveness for every lie, every betrayal, every night he spent unaware that he was being deceived. She said that if he allowed it, she would do everything differently. That she didn't just want to fix what broke, she wanted to build something new, much stronger, much truer. She spoke of knowing the past couldn't be erased, that certain wounds would leave scars forever, but also that she knew people who truly love each other can overcome even the worst mistakes if both are willing. Her voice faltered, her chin quivered, her eyes pleaded for a response she secretly feared hearing. Jacob looked at her, serious, calm, with that gaze she knew so well, but which now seemed impossible to decipher. He stayed silent for a few seconds, breathing slowly, as if organizing his own emotions before speaking. When he began to speak, his voice came out firm, without wavering. He said he understood what she felt, that he believed her regret, that he could see she indeed carried a huge weight for everything that happened. He said she didn't need to apologize anymore because he had already learned to forgive. And he made it clear that the forgiveness wasn't for her, it was for him. Because he understood that holding on to bitterness is like poisoning yourself every day, hoping the other person will die. And he chose to heal, to free himself from what hurt him, to rebuild himself. But in that same calm and firm tone, he said that despite forgiving her, the love that once existed there was no longer present. He said that love died the day he opened the door of his own home and saw the scene he would never forget. And that, as difficult as it had been, he rebuilt himself without her. And in that process, he learned that loving yourself is more important than clinging to someone who chose to break everything they had built. He said that for a long time, he imagined that day might come, that perhaps someday she would appear asking for another chance. But when that day came, he realized he no longer felt the same way. And as beautiful as their story had been for so long, it belonged in the past. And his present was heading down a different path. Sophie bit her lip, closed her eyes, and let the tears flow. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Her hands clutched her leg under the table, as if trying to hold herself together, to prevent her body from collapsing right there. Her chest rose and fell heavily, as if every breath cost more than it should. She shook her head, wiped her tears carelessly, stood up without saying another word. Her bag slipped off her shoulder, almost fell. She adjusted it awkwardly, took one more deep breath, and hurried away, nearly tripping over her own feet. Jacob breathed deeply, held Sophie's gaze for a few seconds, and with a firm but serene voice, said that despite everything, he was grateful for that meeting. That somehow, having this conversation was important to him. That it served as a full stop to a chapter that had been left unresolved for too long. He said he no longer held anger or resentment, and sincerely, he wished her peace, that she would find herself again, heal, and move forward. Because even though the love was gone, the respect for the history they shared still existed. And it was out of respect for all of that that he wanted to say goodbye in this way, clean, mature, definitive. He took out his wallet, pulled out some bills, discreetly placed them under the coffee cup, and stood up. He looked one last time into her eyes, gave a slight nod, and simply said, "Take care, Sophie." Without waiting for any response, he turned his back and walked toward the door. With each step, he felt the weight of the past falling behind him, as if his very soul understood that this cycle was finally over. Sophie stayed there, motionless, staring at the table, holding back tears that, seconds later, began to flow uncontrollably. She tried wiping them with the palms of her hands, with her fingers, but it seemed impossible. Her chest tightened, her breathing faltered, and everything inside her screamed one single thing: she had lost. Truly. Irreversibly. The man who once swore eternal love to her was now just a memory, a broken story that could never be fixed. While she futilely tried to compose herself, Jacob crossed the street. Across from the cafe was a park, and right there, sitting on a bench, was Aubrey. She already knew what was happening. She knew Jacob had arranged this meeting with his ex-wife, and, surprisingly enough, it was she who encouraged him to go. Because she understood that to live a true love, Jacob needed to close that chapter that, in some way, was still pending. When he approached, she stood up, gave a light smile, held his hand, and looking directly into his eyes, asked, "And so, how did it go?" Jacob took a deep breath, looked around as if confirming that the past had stayed exactly where it should, and responded with a calm smile on his face. "It was great. Now I can turn that page of my life that was still open." Aubrey smiled, pulled him closer, and the two walked side by side through the park, hand in hand, talking about the present, their plans, the life they were building together. And at that moment, Jacob had one of the greatest certainties of his life: the past no longer had a place in his future. Meanwhile, across the street, Sophie continued to fight her own internal battle. After a few minutes of crying alone at the table, she dried her face as best she could, grabbed her bag, stood up, and left. She walked with her head down, her chest crushed, carrying the weight of the choices she made and the consequences she never imagined facing. She walked to her car, unlocked the doors with trembling hands, got in, slammed the door forcefully, and right there, she broke down again. The world seemed to collapse around her, and the pain felt greater than anything she had ever experienced in her life. And that's how that story ended. Each of them going their separate ways, living completely different realities. Jacob with a light heart, free, ready to live a new love, a new life. Sophie, carrying the consequences of having destroyed with her own hands everything that had once been the greatest gift life had given her. And from that day forward, they never saw each other again. Each became just a memory in the other's life, a memory that, although never forgotten, would never be enough to change the paths they each chose to follow. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.